Apparently, I'm the last one to take their seats today, and apologize for that. We have a new member, a replacement for Representative Potter, Representative Hoheisel. Welcome to Federal and State Affairs. Bill introductions from committee. Yes, Representative Hazelwood.
Thank you, Chairman.
That's all right. I'm trying to have fun here.
I'm introducing 22 RS 2431. This is at the request of Representative Poskin, so if anyone has any questions, refer to her. It amends KSA 25-2407 to require attribution on political advertisements in school board and community college trustee elections. Currently, they are required in USD 259, school board races only. This bill creates consistency across school boards and includes community college trustee elections. Thank you.
Thank you. Objections? Seeing none, it's accepted. Thank you. Other from the committee? Seeing none, bill introductions from the audience.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Larry Ann Brown, here today on behalf of the Wine Institute. We would like to request that the committee request introduction of a bill dealing with fortified wine. It's conforming state law to what federal law is regarding alcohol by volume.
Thank you. Do you have an RS number?
Oh, I do. RS 3203.
3203. Mike, you have that one? Okay. Without objection.
Thank you.
Other bill introductions from the audience. Representative? Sorry about that. Mr. Brome, you have bill introductions.
Good morning, committee. My name is Kevin Barone. I'm here on behalf of Capital Associates. They are do lab work in medical marijuana and things. And if you remember from last year, we had a medical marijuana laboratory amendment put into the bill, quality assurance labs that would do testing of products and everything. This is that same amendment in an individual bill, so then that way our state and whoever's in charge can put the RFP out and have labs that can be used by law enforcement, KDHE, everybody. It's RS number 3124.
3124. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mike, you've got that one? Thank you. Without objection, we accept it. Other bill introductions from the audience. Seeing none, bill introductions is closed. Folks, we're going to have a hearing. I have only one proponent. If we get through this, we're going to be working bills, and I will tell you we're going to work 2570 first. Then we will work 2528. And if we have time, we may work 2502. With that, Mike, if you'll give us an overview of 2677.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill makes an amendment to the Personal and Family Protection Act, the concealed carry law. And it deals with a section dealing with off-duty law enforcement officers that are authorized to carry concealed carry. The bill provides in lines 22 through 26, no person of authority for a building shall require, request, or record personal information of the off-duty officer, including but not limited to the officer's email address, home phone number, or home address, nor shall the off-duty officer be required to wear anything identifying the officer as a law enforcement officer or as being armed. That's the bill.
Thank you. Questions for the reviser? Yes, go ahead. Representative Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, so the officer has to provide credentials when they're asked. Is that still correct, even if they're off duty?
Right. But I mean, in terms of recording the information, this bill would say you can't do that.
And who would know the person is an off-duty officer if they're on premises? Who would know that?
I'll let the proponent of the bill tell you, but
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No further questions of the reviser. Thank you, Mike. We have one proponent, Chief Darrell Atberry, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police. Good morning, Chief. and welcome to Federal and State Affairs.
Good morning. So I'm Darrell Atterbury. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. I'm representing the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police and the Kansas Peace Officers Association, and I'm also speaking for KSA, Kansas Sheriff's Association. So, as stated, the bill would act to restrict the amount of information that a business or organization representative of a building can collect on an officer when they go to visit the building, go to an event. I want to start off with an example in case you haven't been able to read my testimony. During the baseball season, I went to Riverfront Stadium in the city of Wichita to see a wind surge game, and went to the entry point, notified the person there that I was an off-duty officer. I had my weapon on, as the statute says I can do, and trying to fulfill that. I was asked to step to the side. They called an officer in. They took me to another location. And then I had to fill out on a phone an online or a electronic form with my name, my address, my work location, phone number, etc. Then they took a photograph of my ID. At that point, I was a little torqued. I don't recall whether they took a photograph of me. And then the gentleman reached over and grabbed a fluorescent green wristband and went about putting it on my wrist. I asked what for, because I didn't think it was for free drinks or unlimited access to the stadium. And he said it was to signify that I was carrying a weapon. I was an off-duty officer carrying a weapon. I was incensed, but he didn't make the rules. Then I was escorted from there back up into the stadium to my seat by the police officer. I liked the guy. He's a friend of mine, but he was doing what the rules and regulations of Riverfront Stadium were. In a different situation, one of my officers took a friend to the hospital. That friend was having an acute mental episode. He was going to get evaluated. They decided to keep him. They asked my officer, who was in plain clothes, carrying, if he wanted to go back and say goodbye to his friend, and the officer notified them he was an off-duty officer, showed him his ID, and said it probably wouldn't be a good idea to introduce my off-duty weapon into the secure environment. Logical, reasonable. The staff member left. Moments later, 2 armed security guards ran up, asked him if he was armed. He offered to show him his ID, and they refused. They didn't care. They told him he could go put his gun in his car and come back, or just leave. So he was escorted out of the building. Things like this happen all the time. I've talked to other officers throughout the state, in the other organizations, and it happens in venues all across the state where officers are kind of run through the mill when they go to events. We're hoping that this will change that. Personally, I don't believe when this was created that was the legislative intent to make this happen, and we're hoping that through passage of this amendment, we'll be able to stop some of it. Stand for questions.
Representative, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What kind of problems do you think could come up if, let's say, everybody now, law enforcement, has to wear a brightly colored wristband going into these areas? What problem could that cause?
Well, as I've explained this to other people, citizens, non-law enforcement, when it's come up in conversations, their comment to me is, oh yeah, just put a target on your back, because somebody's going to find out what that wristband's for, and then through the season, say at Riverfront Stadium, anybody who's wearing that is an off-duty police officer carrying a weapon. So you could run the risk of some drunk patron deciding to take advantage of that and assault.
So to clarify, as this would progress or as time would go by, people would learn what that actually means when you're wearing that.
Absolutely.
Further questions? I have one. Most departments, do they not make that a requirement of a police officer to carry their weapon 24 hours a day?
Some do, but it's optional for most departments now.
It is?
Yeah.
I know the federal government requires, as a federal officer, you're required to keep your weapon with you. I think there's one exception if you go to a place of worship, and if you're a participant, you can choose to leave it in your vehicle.
I take mine to church.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do nowadays, but anyways. Yes, Representative Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This past football season, we had a situation at Arrowhead Stadium where an off-duty sheriff's officer was up in the stands creating problems and started a fight with a little kid. And people were telling him to sit down and shut up, and he said, well, I'm a sheriff. I'm entitled to act like this, or he has permission to act like that. What would you tell that guy?
Oh, he's going to have a lot of problems because this discussion's come up. To answer your question directly, he's violating department policy. He's, at least my department policy. Most departments have very similar policies. And we usually have something about causing embarrassment to the department. And if that's the case, there's going to be an investigation. We'll have a finding in that investigation, and then there's punishment to be doled out from that. One of the reasons, another reason for bringing this to you today, it's kind of associated with that, is that officers have let this go for a long time because they don't want to cause a scene at the ticket booth. They'll either take their gun back to their car or go through the rigmarole of filling out the form just not to cause a disturbance. Because they don't want to be under investigation for bringing embarrassment to the department or causing a big scene. So that can happen too. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Howe.
Thank you, Chief Atterbury. Are there any similar issues for law enforcement officers that are off duty that perhaps open carry, or is that just a totally different issue altogether?
Well, I think that would be an associated issue. As I recall, this doesn't have to be a concealed weapon, although I don't open carry, and I don't think most officers open carry. That's just not what we do. But it should be the same whether they're carrying open or concealed. If they show their identification, they should be allowed in just like an on-duty officer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions of the chief? Yes, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you for your service. And this isn't directly related to this bill, but please walk through what you would do as an off-duty law enforcement officer, and there is an altercation in a public arena. What would you do, and how does that unfold? Thank you.
In most situations, especially like in the arena, people have been checked at the gate, so they're not carrying weapons, probably, although some things can be smuggled in. People tuck stuff in their shoes and boots and so on, so it does happen. If your imagination can think of an event specifically, I could probably address that, but an officer would have to evaluate that situation first, see if it's serious enough to become involved in. Then if it is serious enough to get involved in, make sure somebody's calling for backup, trying to get some assistance, notifying the staff of wherever it is you are. And in notifying 911 because you're involved in an off-duty situation, and then intervene with, voice, if you have to, put hands on, and be forceful if necessary. Hopefully not rise to the level of using deadly force like with a weapon or drawing the weapon to display it, because that's always dangerous. Off-duty, the gun has to come out at the same time your identification comes out. You've maybe heard of blue-on-blue incidents. That's where officers shoot other officers when they're off-duty. And that recently that happened in January back east, where an off-duty officer was taking some action, hadn't identified himself, if I remember correctly, and was shot and killed. So it's a delicate line to walk.
Thank you. That was exactly what I wanted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further, Representative Wagner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the rationale behind the venue? I mean, what do they gain from Xeroxing your information or requesting all that? Are they required by their insurance company to do that? Or what is their point in even going beyond just, seeing your badge?
Well, all I can really do is give you my opinion because I don't know the answer to that. And I think it's by going through this long, drawn-out process, I think it's a way of dissuading officers from exercising that right.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Heiberger.
Thanks for being here, and thank you for your service also. I mean, do you think venues like the one you mentioned in hospital have a right to control who brings weapons into their facility?
Well, I think they have that right up to the point where they violate state law. And the current law says that they can't do it, and they've taken that and expanded on it by collecting information and deciding that they're not going to follow state law.
Thank you. No further? Thank you, Chief. Thank you for coming here today.
Thank you.
Committee, I have no other proponents. Anyone appearing that wish to offer any testimony in these proceedings? Seeing none, I will close the hearing on House Bill 2677. I want to mention, I should have done this earlier, welcome Representative Henderson back. Thank you, Representative. We're sorry for your loss. You go right ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the members of this committee. I did receive your cards, and I want to thank you for your condolences and prayers during the loss of my mother. I appreciate that a whole lot. Thank you.
That's quite all right. On this committee, you're part of the team or the family. With that, committee, I would ask you to go into your files or pull up your computer and pull out 2570. I'll give you just a moment to do that. House Bill 2570. If I recall correctly, this was a non-controversial bill. We had opponents, had no opponents, had possibly a neutral. With that, what is the pleasure of the committee as to 2570? Representative Ardenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out House Bill 2570 favorably for passage.
Do I have a second? Representative Penn is the second. Discussion. There's an amendment? I don't think so. No, no amendment. No amendments offered. Okay. You do have an amendment. Representative Howe.
Sorry about that. I do have an amendment. This amendment is requiring training and certification program to be established for county election officials. You can see on page 1, it says, a new section 2, it says the Secretary of State and the Kansas County Clerks and Election Officials Association shall create a comprehensive training and certification program for county election officials. Each county must have their chief election official or deputy election official trained and certified before the 2024 general election. Certifications shall be renewed as determined by the Secretary of State and the Kansas County Clerks and Election Officials Association. This is just very simple. In conferring with a number of county clerks from the state, I learned that county clerks have a section in their training that is elections, but they don't have a separate more complete training specifically for elections. And then our 2 election commissioners that are appointed directly by the Secretary of State's office, they are not required, of course, to take the county clerk training because they aren't county clerks. So this would just create a formalized, hopefully very thorough program that would provide resources and training and hopefully make sure there's not any accidental gaps in training.
Okay. I have a question. Did you run this by the Secretary of State's office and see what the cost was? I'm assuming there's some cost.
I did not ask specifically about the cost. I got the amendment this morning, so.
Okay.
But I did confer with the Secretary of State's office, and they said that they were agreeable.
Okay.
So
I'm going to ask Clay Barker, the Deputy Special Secretary of State, this training, is there a cost? And who would assume that cost, the county or the state? Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Representative Howell did send us this idea previously, so this isn't a surprise to us at all. Just to let you know, our office is already doing a certification program for counties just on our own, and we've started this process, but it isn't required in statute. This would put it in statute, so we're not opposed to the general idea. Just let the committee know we've already, we're in negotiations with a former elections commissioner from Johnson County to be heading up the program.
So what would be the position of the Secretary of State, if you know that?
Mr. Chair, I guess we'd be neutral on it. We're not opposed to the idea since we're already doing it. Whether it needs to be in statute or not would be up to the committee, but there's...
Okay. Thank you. Is there a second for the amendment? Representative Arnkamp, is that a second? Thank you. I have a second. Discussion on the amendment. Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just questions in general about who sets the standards for what this training is. And you mentioned a former Johnson County election commissioner. Which one? It does matter.
Ms. Schmidt, Connie Schmidt. And we're working through the...
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. Thank you. I will support this.
And to finish answering your question, Representative, is we're working through the topics that would be needed to be certified by the county election officer or deputy, what they need to know to get a certification. And I appreciate that you pushed it out a little bit so we could finish getting the process set up, the effective date.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment. Representative Heiberger. No, I'll come back to Miller.
I have a revisor question. The amendment states that each county must have their election officials certified before the 2024 general election. I mean, if we put this in statute and then 2024 rolls around, we're still going to have a provision in statute after 2024 that says that people must have their certification before 2024 unless we amend it. So is that, do you see that as a problem?
I don't. The sometimes these dates are put in a statute for a particular reason. When they're amended 10 years later, we'll delete it, the date. But I mean, it's common to have a date in a statute.
But I mean, if this is on the books in 2025, our law will say each county must have their official certified before the 24 general election. And if somebody's come on board after that.
Well, we could maybe need to add the language in each election thereafter or whatever.
That would make me happier.
Thank you, Representative Miller.
This is a question either for the Secretary of State or the maker of the amendment or motion. Do you really think that something like this would help us run a more effective and efficient election?
And I'll direct that to the carrier of the amendment.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
I said, do you really believe that such a measure would improve the effectiveness of our election?
I do. I think that having a manual and an actual official program to go through will help prepare, especially as we have newly elected county clerks coming in that have no experience running elections, to have something formalized that they go through and something to rely on. And obviously it will need revised and updated periodically. And recertification would need to be done. But I also believe it would help build confidence with the public. And these same election officials are required to interact with the media. They go speak on these issues. And so in my opinion, it provides a streamlined support system to help them be efficient and confident in their job. And I think it also builds confidence with the public.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. So I don't know why we'd want to wait. This bill, this act is not effective until publication in the statute book, which I think occurs in July. This is February. The Secretary of State's already, or his spokesperson's already said they're substantially completed with this process. And back to the point that Representative Heiberger made, I think it's a good point, but it can be easily cured just by striking the sentence that says it's effective for the 2024 general election. If we strike that sentence, we leave the enacting date as statute book. That gives them till July to do this. And I think it's important that our citizens have confidence in this year's elections. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this amendment gets adopted, I'll offer a second one to strike that sentence. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for the maker of the amendment, if I may.
May.
What happens if, for one reason or another, a county cannot get their chief election official or deputy certified by the 2024 election? What is the recourse?
I don't have a recourse put in there. I just wanted to have some sort of my thought was just having some sort of a deadline, because I know both the Secretary of State's office and all the county clerks and, our chief election officials are very busy running elections. And so I wanted to have some sort of deadline. I picked 2024 just because I wanted them to have time to go through this process and to confer between the Secretary of State's office and the Election Officials Association.
Yeah, no, I think that 2024, I think that should be enough time, but I'm just in my head going through, something happening in an elections office in some county in western Kansas where they can't comply with the 2024 deadline. And I'm just wondering what happens to that county elections office if they can't comply. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Representative Hoyt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be okay to have the representative from the Secretary of State's office address that question about what could result if compliance isn't met? I just wouldn't want to get into a circumstance where our elections in certain counties could be in jeopardy.
I'm going to direct that to the reviser. He's our legal expert, not the Secretary of State.
There is no penalty. There would be no provision authorizing the Secretary of State to declare. I mean, to me, it's a requirement, but there's no penalty attached to it. So if you don't meet it, then unless you want to put some penalty in here, there would not be one. So I might just address the other comment here. We could change the date to 2022 general election, but the ongoing certification, the next sentence says, shall be renewed as determined by the Secretary of State and the Clerks Association. So I don't think we need more than just changing the date for Representative Miller to, I'm not clear what sentence you would strike.
All right, Representative Hoyt?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that clarification. And then I do want to comment on the date. I think that the issue at hand is a good point, that the way that it's worded to get the deadline of 2024 makes it could be reworded differently to just say that from the this applies to the 2024 general election and beyond. But I did hear from the representative from the Secretary of State's office saying this program is up and running, but it's not going to be ready. People would not be trained by this election, I don't believe. So I think putting it into statute for this election is probably too soon. And he did comment that he appreciated this amendment gave them more time. So I wouldn't be supportive of, I like the 2024, but I do think we need to address the language issue.
Thank you. Representative Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I ask a question of the Secretary of State's office?
You may.
How long is the certification process you guys are coming up with now?
Representative, if I gave the impression we were substantially completed, I apologize for that. We're working on this program, making lists of the training and getting it ready. It will not be ready for 2022 to roll out for the entire state. But I believe 2024 would be a perfectly valid election for this to be ready. And did that answer your question, or?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, once you guys have the certification process up and going, how long would that take for a elections officer to get certified?
I'm not exactly sure, because we've been talking about maybe the larger counties, the person would go to the county with the ones with election commissioners, and for the smaller counties, we'd have regional meetings for a day or two and go through that, and then the person running the program could also visit smaller counties and discuss individual issues. So it's part training, part working to standardize processes throughout the state.
Okay. Thank you, Clay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Howe.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have a question for the carrier of the bill.
Of the amendment? Yes, go right
Of
ahead.
the amendment? Yes. How do you envision this training or certification process to be? Is it something online, in person? Is it a 1-day or 2-day commitment? The reason I ask that is our county clerks are tasked with multiple duties, and also who would incur the cost of this training?
I would say there's probably going to be costs for probably at least some for both the Secretary of State's office and for the counties. The reason that I put that this should be designed, this training and certification program should be designed by both the Secretary of State's and the County Clerks Association and Election Officials Association, is so that they could work together as a team to create something that is reasonable for both parties, and both comprehensive and reasonable. And I think they're very qualified experts in the ability to determine which format is the best way. If they want to do it by a video series or go and have conferences, basically like the Secretary of State's office was referring to, I think they're perfectly capable of choosing what is best for them, and having them work together, I think, helps create that teamwork between the difference of the needs, perhaps, for the counties versus some of the smaller counties versus the larger counties.
May I have another question? Is there a testing requirement with your amendment as well, or is this just more of a continuing education?
I have not specified that there would be a testing requirement. Again, I specifically listed this as drafting this up together so that I felt like it created a good balance between the two organizations.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I have one comment on that as a follow-up?
Let me come back to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Let me try to get Representative Heiberger.
Yeah, I'd just like to offer another version of a potential second amendment if this passes, that after new section 2, it starts no later than July 1st, 2024, comma, the secretary, et cetera. And then on the fifth line, you strike before the 2024 general election, so that line would say each county must have their chief election official or deputy election official trained and certified. And certifications must be renewed. So, the goal is to have this in place by the 2024 election. I think that would make it a little clearer, if that would be acceptable to bring her the amendment.
Thank you. Representative Howe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the intention of this amendment. I think it is worth great discussion. However, I do think it would be important for us to perhaps do a standalone bill as it relates to this, and which would allow the Secretary of State's office as well as the county clerks to weigh in and give us more information moving forward. So that is just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Howe, you read my mind, because if we had a separate bill where we could have the county clerks come in and the Secretary of State, I'm always cautious about amendments because they're sometimes not well thought out, and that's the reason we talk about them in committee. That I would be agreeable that maybe a bill that should be introduced, because I want to know what the impact and who's going to pay. I want to know if the county are paying, if the Secretary of State's paying. I want to hear from the county clerks from large jurisdictions and from small jurisdictions and how this could impact them, and whether or not, what is this certification? How do you obtain this certification? What's the prerequisites? What do you need to do to get certified? And those questions are normally asked at a hearing when we have those folks in front of us. So thank you, Representative Howe. But I'm careful now, you're reading my mind. So I'll have to be very cautious about that. But Representative Eppley, you have a question.
No. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll use a different cliche. I think great minds think alike. I was just going to say, when you got a concept and dates floating around like this, it sounds like we're trying to write a bill here today that ought to have its own time, its own hearing, and its own experts here testifying. So you said it all. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do amendments have RS numbers?
No.
I was trying to read your mind, sorry.
I think the representative said great minds think alike.
It's a block.
Yes, Representative. Yeah. Well, I'm going to encourage the representative, if her amendment fails, that we will take an RS number. Representative, you have two options. You may close on your amendment, or you may withdraw your amendment.
I am completely fine with converting it to a bill. I just assumed that having it as an amendment would be more efficient, and so that's why I chose that route, being a newbie. So, is there anything, forgive my lack of experience here, if I leave it as an amendment, and it gets voted down, can I turn around and switch it to a bill?
You can do either. You could choose to withdraw it and introduce a new bill, or you may have them vote for it. They may vote for it, they may not. But if it fails, then you could still introduce a separate bill.
I think I will leave the amendment standing as is, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you. And that's your close, correct?
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor of the Howell amendment, say aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The motion fails. if you'll visit with the reviser, they will get you, and we'll have, and I can assure you we will have a hearing because I think it's an interesting subject. Anything, further discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Representative, you may close on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I close and move my motion.
Thank you. You have heard the motion of Representative Arnberger to pass House Bill 2570 out favorably. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. Bill passes. Representative, you want your vote registered as a yay? Thank you. Representative Heiberger. Thank you. Let's go to the 2528. House Bill 2528. Oh, over here. $25.28. We heard this last week. What is the pleasure of the committee?
Mr. Chair, I move that we pass out House Bill 2528 favorably for passage.
Thank you.
Second.
Second by Representative Epley. Was that Epley?
Yep.
Okay. Discussion.
Mr. Chair, I do have an amendment.
Thank you. So, can you
If I may explain as he hands out?
Can you explain your amendment while we're passing it out?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Basically, this keeps the theme of the bill intact, but it does broaden the bill to include all individuals who have inflatables in the state, not just those that are not-for-profit. And that's really the essence of it. It just broadens it for all people that have inflatables in the state of Kansas, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So you're treating everyone that rents inflatables the same. Would that be correct?
Yes, we're trying to level that playing field, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a second on the amendment? Representative Arnberger is a second. Discussion on the amendment. Yes, Representative Arnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I brought this bill to this committee because one of my constituents reached out to me about this. I spoke with him over the weekend to discuss this possible amendment. He is in favor of it, and so I just want to share my support of this amendment as well.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment. To my understanding, we're putting, yes, Representative Reese, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll direct this to the carrier of the amendment.
Please.
So if a church or not-for-profit owns or a private entity owns an inflatable, they still fall under this law. Would that be correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But it eliminates individuals.
This bill. I'm going to pay attention to him right now.
Is there a question directed to that? I think he directed a question to you, or at least a comment.
It would cover, they would still be covered, those
Okay, but
churches.
if I owned an inflatable for my grandkids, I wouldn't have bear any responsibility under this law.
Unless you rented it to your grandkids.
Yes, I read it. Okay.
If you charge your grandkids, yes, but otherwise, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the amendment. I mean, I think these devices can pose danger sometimes, but there's nothing that a state inspection is going to stop from happening. I mean,
Thank you.
So,
further discussion, Representative Hoyt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't support any current changes to this act. I did look up at the Consumer Safety Index, and in a 10-year period, there were 113,000 emergency department injuries related to these devices and 12 deaths. And I do think that having those inspections does help to remind individuals how these should be used and making sure the equipment is safe, as well as different weather events and things where they shouldn't be used. So I personally think that this act is important and will not be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion. Seeing none, Representative, you may close on your amendment.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say that in response to Representative's concerns about safety, I'm not sure that these inspections are going to diminish any rate of accident on these devices. I checked in the state of Kansas in the last year. I believe there were 7 events that occurred even with inspections. None of them were serious. This is felt to be, over intrusion into a business that really has no moving parts. It's separate from the intent of the Amusement Right Act that was passed 3 or 4 years ago, and I really think deserves to be excluded from this process going forward. Just like the 501(c)(3)s, we just think it should be fair for everyone that owns inflatables from the current statutes, so of the Amusement Right Act. Thank you.
So you're closing?
And I close.
Thank you. Based upon the motion by Representative Epley to amend, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. The bill has been amended. We're back on the bill. Further discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out House Bill 2528 favorably for passage as amended.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. Bill passes out. I'm sorry. Yes, Representative Epley. Representative Clayton, you want your vote registered as a no, correct? With the thumb down. Representative Hoyt is a no. Further recorded votes? Representative Heiberger is a yes. Thank you very much. Committee, we've got hearings tomorrow and Thursday. We'll be working, these are the bills that I anticipate working. We may work the bill that we heard today, 2677. We're going to work Senate Bill 2. Thought we were going to work it today, but we have an amendment that's being drafted. We'll be doing 5027 tomorrow. And we will probably take up 2502, or maybe not, it's according to what time, the amount of time in the first 2 will take. I will open up one last time, bill introductions, in case there's bill introductions. Representative Howe, do you have a bill introduction?
If it's okay to introduce it now, then yes.
We will, I'm going to accept your bill introduction.
Okay, thank you.
I cannot give you an RS number, but I will have an RS number in just a little bit.
Awesome.
My advisor tells me.
Thank you for your grace in learning new things.
So I've accepted that without objection from the committee. Seeing no objection. Yes, you're objecting?
I'm not objecting, but it's implied what she's introducing, but I think for purposes of the minutes, we need to specify, since we don't have an RS number in particular, that it's the amendment that we discussed.
The amendment to the bill that was just passed out.
I've got an RS number.
She has an RS number.
It's RS 3234.
Thank you. And I will, if I can get that turned in, Representative, I'll get that heard next week. If we meet next week, we may be on the floor all day next week. We know how that is before turnaround. Anything else for the good of the committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned.